I trust you're familiar with the scripture, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. Now, Paul goes on to say, and we are ready to punish every disobedience when your obedience is made complete. So there's a matter there of, I believe, people wanting relief in a certain sense, or people acting out in a certain way. And either or doesn't much matter. Some are suffering, either under their own ignorance or presumption, as I often have. Perhaps even now being presumptuous in this. And that's, if I could share something else, that's a great thing for which I really need to rely on God. Another great thing, right? The difference between presumption and faith, or the boldness of faith, because they often aren't discerned too easily when one is being presumptuous or one is just being bold in the faith. And we have a boldness in our faith, thanks be to God. There is a boldness in our faith. We believe that we believe is true. And if we have the witness of the Spirit, common expression amongst believers, but nevertheless, we know somebody is making known to us in a place that really we can't show anybody else. It's a deep place, and in the sense we can't prove it's there, right? The Holy of Holies that each one of us tabernacles with God in. What comes out of it is the testimony of it, but what's taking place there, we really can't open ourselves and, hey, I'm going to prove to you God is inside, or prove to you God is, whether or not I even believe he's inside, So we find ourselves in these places, and I was thinking of Paul and what he said there, tearing down imaginations. And every high thing that exalts itself, proud things that exalt themselves against the knowledge of God. And to bring every thought into captivity to obedience to Christ. And as with most things in which I am instructed because I don't know how to do them. I don't know how to do it, so I need instruction in it. I'm told to do it, but I don't know how to do it. So you take the instruction, you believe it, it's true. It even has a witness of the Spirit, if I can say that, in it. Yeah, that makes sense. I have some experience in Jesus Christ, and have encountered things, even high things, that oppose the knowledge of God, as we've shared the gospel. We've probably been called foolish. We've probably been called naive. We've probably been called gullible, stupid, ignorant, superstitious. And to whatever extent we've experienced physical resistance even. We have. But of all those things, it's really not the physical resistance. Though at the time, that's usually the most, what would you say? Deeply felt, right? When you get hit or spit on, you feel that quite exquisitely, that you don't doubt you felt it. Somebody slaps you on the cheek, you felt it. You know you felt it. But it's the ideas that oppose. It's the arguments presented that oppose that really do have the capacity to influence. Because again, we can't forget, or we can forget, but if we are forgetting, let's be reminded we are to have our minds renewed. So there is a working from this Holy of Holies. And if somebody wants to point to their head and say Holy of Holies, that's fine. I've got no issue with that. Might even agree more. But there's a place in this consciousness of God where ideas want to assault, and they can only by the grace of God be kept from doing damage, be kept from harming the faith that was once delivered to the saints, even us. But we find out, that stuff that's working, that causes us to wonder, that sounds like a good argument, or if we're trying to make a great deal of sense with the gospel and the gospel, because the gospel does have a reason to it. It is not only a reason, it is the reason. That's the true reasoning, the logos, the logic of God is in the gospel. Which is why Paul in another place says that the foolishness of God is greater than the wisdom of man. Now it sounds foolish to the natural man, but even the foolishness of God is greater than the wisdom of the natural man. And Paul speaks of those who are wise in their own eyes, the wise of this age. Where's a scholar? Where's the scribe? All of the super intelligent people that often have, or just regularly intelligent people that often have resistance. And we find sometimes that there's an affinity within us where that resistance is like, gee, that's not a bad argument almost. It kind of makes sense, like I said before, and then we find ourselves in turmoil, So in saying all of that, getting back to presumption, I don't know. But faith is a wonderful thing, isn't it? When we don't know. Faith, huh? Faith that our knowing or not knowing, as comfortable or uncomfortable as it may make us feel, when we believe we know something, we're pretty comfortable, assured, secured, feeling established, even feeling that boldness is one experience. Being uncomfortable, not knowing, doesn't affect God. And we don't pin our hopes on whether we're being presumptuous or whether we're being faithful to the uttermost. Now, don't misunderstand. I'm not saying be careless about it. But when we come to the place we see we can do nothing about it, we have to rely on another, even the one who came into all our unknowing to make things right, all our ignorance, all our resistance, rebellion, stiff-neckedness, all our hostility to him and enmity toward him. Not like we were leaning a little toward God and Jesus helped push us just enough to get it right. No, hostility to God, enmity in the natural man to things of God. So that's always where our faith lies, that he who does that, did that, accomplished that for us, is still at work. And if I am being presumptuous, so be it. We have a Father who will discipline us, and not as natural fathers, according to their whim. He disciplines us for our good. So the outcome of things is always in God's hands. And again, that's a comfort. Whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong, doesn't matter. Matter of fact, it's almost laughable whether I'm right. God is right. God is always right. So in this idea, in this, not idea, but yeah, in this idea of ideas, in this idea of things that clash and the resistances that can be a little more intense over time than a slap in the face, a kick in the head, or whatever, spit on the face, are the ideas that can somehow go in, and we try to process them because we want to be ready to give answer for the hope that's in us. And when this hope is resisted, even to us appearing reasonably, or with reason, or some reason, then it has to be dealt with. And what I'm going to share now, I hope, maybe I'll be shut up, maybe God's hand will slap across my mouth, and this will be the end of this. But it's something that it's been a long time coming for me to see having certain things settled. And we know that smart people, are you a smart person? Who isn't, right? Who isn't to themselves a smart person? Who isn't as smart as they can be? But smart people often have difficulty with the gospel because it is greater than the wisdom of man. And it's not unusual for smart people. Now, I'm not talking about intelligence here or even people with consciousness, but just smart people. People that believe they're smart are told they're smart. Have put a lot of faith in the wisdom of man, for the most part. And so the wisdom of man looks like, that's the ultimate expression of consciousness. And again, we need to be reminded God's foolishness is greater than the wisdom of man. So we hold to the gospel, even when we don't have answers for these things that tend to want to assault our consciousness, things that seem reasonable as we present the reason of the gospel and encounter resistance and even offense against the gospel with another form of reason that at the time to us seems, that's almost reasonable. So if you have, as I have over time, shared the gospel with people, shared what you believe, or even thought within yourself, finding certain resistances in yourself, reasons coming up that seem reasonable. We call them doubts, right? Jesus said to the disciples when he appeared to them, why do doubts, rise in your hearts? Why do fears rise in your hearts? It's like they're seeing something they can't believe. Jesus is alive. The resurrection is true. It says they were in disbelief for joy. I believe I mentioned that somewhere else, but disbelief for joy. It's like, this is too good to be true, but it's true. And so, there's an opportunity there for, am I really seeing this? I imagine that's in one sense what Jesus was sensing from them, that this thing of, what do I trust now? This can't be true. Dead men don't rise from the dead. I saw him killed. I saw him, put in a tomb. Yeah, I know he said he was coming back, but I've never seen anything like this. This is exactly how he said it would be. And the joy of it. And you got to admit sometimes, joy makes you fly, doesn't it? Joy gets you up there. Joy gets you the story of Icarus, right? Or whatever. It's a natural or a myth, whatever. But you get the gist. Like you can fly. You feel like you can fly too high, man. If I let this take me too high, I can. Look at that. That's a long way down. And so this joy of seeing the Lord is like, oh man, this could take me too high. So why do fears rise in our hearts? So even as I'm sharing this, I'm finding myself being blessed by the Lord in regard to anything I said before about presumption. If I have a long way to fall to learn a lesson, praise God. Praise God. We do learn a lot through bumps and bruises. Let's not lie to one another. Chastenings. discipline, finding ourselves opposing God, and in that being opposed by God in certain matters or areas to our good, just like a father would do, opposing the foolishness of his children to deliver a goodness. So, thank you for bearing with me so far. But the arguments and contentions that I've dealt with over years, I imagine you have too. We speak of beginnings, we speak of the gospel, we speak of God to those who often do not want to accept any notion of God, or at least they tell us so. God, what a foolish idea, what a quaint idea, what a naive and gullible construct, God, and then all of the reasons follow that can sometimes get into and also find a place of hook inside of us for upsetting. Oh, you only believe in God because you fear death. You only believe in God because you're terrified that you can't accept what I accept. I, the atheist, the unbeliever, I walk nakedly in this world without any need of a crutch to face all that life has to offer, and you are the weak vessel that can't do this without some kind of magic friend that accompanies you. And at times, finding myself in fear of certain things, I've had to say, that's pretty reasonable. Do I look to you, God, only because I get afraid? Now, God has no rebuke for that. He has a cure for it, but no rebuke of it. If we're honest, I'm afraid, I fear. But that's not the reason. You see, there's no reason for God. We don't reason to God. God is. We're the product of his reason. He is not the construct of our reason. That's a great comfort, too, to find out, don't do this. Don't start building here to get there. That's the Tower of Babel. Whatever has to get out of the way till this is established. God is. God is. And everything else is consequent, according to God, as reason, as purpose. So even all creation, not even all creation, especially all creation, that's what we're moving in right now. This thing that you see, this flesh stuff, this material stuff is moving in the creation. A creation that is material, but now really smart people has told us it's not only material, it's space, it's energy, it's forces, again, energy, but expression of energy, power in the energy, heat, electromagnetic forces, gravitational forces, all these things. And in that, as I've mentioned in some others, is a thing called consciousness. We mostly believe we have it. Consciousness. Is it a thing? My coffee cup, I say, is a thing. But when you get into things like consciousness, ideas, love, truth, even fact, what does the word fact mean? So all of these things have their ultimate, for us, their ultimate foundation as things here, right? When we talk about matter, we could be talking about any number of things as matter, but matter as the idea, matter as the concept, matter as the thing we're discussing is all of it. So, in one sense, we're always talking derivatively, right? I mean, this is matter, but it fits in the bigger thing of matter. space here between me and this little phone or whatever, which we know is crudely defined as space, but there's space here. Okay, there's a lot of air, nitrogen, oxygen, all of these inert gases that are mixed into. But space, true space would be nothing in it, I suppose, like, or at least like what they call outer space. Outer space. Where it's a vacuum. What we understand is a vacuum, because we don't see anything in it yet. We don't know, right? We don't know. We say atoms. I mean, big discovery. There was a sense of it long time ago. That's big stuff is made out of littler stuff. And all the big stuff is just all this little stuff put together. So, the really brainy, intelligent people like you and I, we know we're atoms. I'm a bunch of molecules stuck together. And if on a certain level you could take a look at me, you'd say there's more space to me than anything. More space to me than matter. There's more space to this than matter, which makes you wonder, why doesn't my finger go right through it? Reminds me of that story, I don't know, I'd heard about this guy, his name was Rutherford, I think. And when he discovered or, intuited, I forget how he came to the knowledge, but the things had more space in them than actual matter. It says he was afraid to get out of bed because he was terrified he'd fall through the floor. Now, why he thought the bed would support him, but the floor wouldn't, I guess it's just like, stay wherever you are. As long as this is working, don't make a move. And we feel that sometimes too, don't we? I mean, even in my faith, it's like I've had that terror where I don't even want to move. Okay, if I move, something could definitely go wrong. I don't know why I mentioned that. Maybe you've had that experience, that paralysis. It's a real terror, So I understand that guy, Rutherford, because rational thought or reasonable question would be, hey man, why do you think the bed is going to support you but the floor won't? And he might not even want to answer. I'm just going to be where I'm being right now because this is working and I don't know what else will. So I've had that experience too, walking with the Lord, just like locked up. It's terrifying, but I'm not saying no good can come of it because we learn to move. God gets us to move. And then we find out, okay, this works in this situation. This works in this situation. This also, and when I say it works, I'm making it sound like it's mechanistic or we're using something like a tool or something, this works. But it's faith working to get us to go into the land we do not know, to get us to go to what we don't know, right? To show us faith works everywhere. So getting back, very reasonable idea, and it was, I thought about it for a while, but finally a friend had the temerity, and this friend calls himself an atheist or an agnostic at least, and he said, we all agree on creation, more or less, is what he was saying. In other words, everything had a start. There's a place of start. We just disagree as to what it is or how it takes place, who was there, what was there. It's kind of I know there are believers that go for the Big Bang, and I've got nothing against the Big Bang, nothing, whatever. But I mean, to break it down, it would be, okay, you say God started everything. We see the Big Bang, all right, the Big Bang. So I began to think over time, what is the difference there? Well, the difference is the sticking point has always been consciousness. Getting back to what I mentioned about consciousness. Is it a thing? Is consciousness? That question has to be answered first, doesn't it? Before we can even proceed. At least in this discussion. If there is no consciousness, I have the faith God can give us consciousness. And I may not have any consciousness right up to this moment thinking I do. But God can give consciousness. So that's off the table as far as what God can do, God can't do. But let's speak to one another, because the sticking point has been consciousness versus a sheer mechanistic process. The Big Bang, all matter, material, totally compressed down to whatever size. Teaspoon, half a teaspoon, I don't know what it is. Then all of a sudden, ba-boom, and everything comes into being. Now, of course, the question remains, well, what happened before that? How did this half teaspoon, So then we get into this contention with people, you, the believer, says that no thing can come from nothing, or everything has to come from somewhere, have a start. But then you say the reason for the start is God, who has no beginning. So you seem to be in that contradiction. You seem to be in that place where you're saying, you're basing your argument on everything has to have a start. And so the thing that started everything is the thing that doesn't have a start. So you've kind of given a leg up for an argument against that. And the unbeliever often says, well, if you say God always was, I say matter and energy always was. Do you see? If you can say this person always was, I can say matter, energy, forces, space always was. That's the thing that always was, and it's just transmuting, morphing, whatever. So the question becomes consciousness, because if it's a consciousness that is responsible for the creation with intent and purpose for it, that makes all the difference, because that's God. The consciousness to it is God. So then that brings us here with consideration of consciousness. Is consciousness? Is consciousness no different than table, no different than cup, no different than coffee? As a thing we can talk about. As a thing that can be conceptual, as a thing that is conceptualized, which is kind of silly because we do that with consciousness. So it's almost like we have to presume consciousness is real to even do any of this, don't we? We have to accept consciousness to consider. So that's already on the table. Consciousness. Everybody presumes they have it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have any idea about anything. All ideas are in the consciousness, right? And there's subconscious and all of that stuff too. We could talk about it, but I don't see at this point any need to. Just consciousness. Is consciousness. Is consciousness. And if someone was willing to say, no, it's not, okay. You want to play games. No, there's no such thing as consciousness. And I've had people say, well, we don't really know what it is, or the limits of it, or the extent of it, or how to define it, and that's fine, but you wouldn't in any other venture use a tool for discovery or that you didn't have some confidence in and understand it's working to some extent. Correct? And no other way would you employ something. I mean, this all requires consciousness just talking about it, right? I mean, on its face, it's ridiculous. It's absurd. But you wouldn't use a voltmeter that you didn't trust to find out whether there's power in that outlet before you stick your tongue on it or your fingers. So regardless, we may not understand all about consciousness. We're confident it gives us enough information to work with. This is at least enough. And depending on who we are and our personalities, it gives me plenty to work with. My consciousness, my knowing, gives me plenty to work with. And I'm quite sure of it. So if we say consciousness is, this cup is, the All the stuff around me, the fan above me is, the glass is. And all of that stuff, that matter, and the stuff between my head and the fan, we call space, and the light that's coming off of the bulb up there that's emitting photons, so you can see me. That energy is there. But it was all there if we're going to have the contention of the Big Bang. Everything is in there, matter, material. And let's say the Big Bang is the start. Let's not even go back to what was before the Big Bang. Let's just say the Big Bang, okay, the Big Bang is the start. Then everything was there at the start. Space was there. Energy was there. Matter is there. It's like a guy looking at a mountain, right? And he knows there's iron ore in there, and he can see a locomotive. A stupid example, right? But I can look at that mountain, and I can see there's a locomotive. There's enough metal, enough iron in there, and carbon, and whatever, to make steel, and there's a locomotive in that mountain. It's there, and it really is. It has to be formed by his skill and understanding, but it's there. The stuff is there. So stuff doesn't spontaneously become what it's not. If it's not there, it can't be there. Do you understand that? If there wasn't energy, space, matter, all of this stuff at the Big Bang, then all you're going to find is what was there at the beginning. All you're going to find in the universe, in the creation, was there at the beginning. Your toaster was there. Your hubcap was there. I was there. Henny Youngman was there. Everything. And now, it's more than just saying potential, because now we have an existence that we look back with. Because we can talk about things that we don't know yet that could still be there. It's like in the year 1410, they wouldn't have said the locomotive was there. They might have said King Henry or King Arthur was there, or Julius Caesar was there. But they wouldn't have said you and I were there, because we weren't there yet. But now we're in a place where we're looking back with things that we identify as being. So we know they have to be there, because they are. You and I are not potentially anymore. You and I are. So even though we say it was there in potential, the fact that we are proves it was there. So if we say consciousness is, and nothing can come into the being unless it is there, actually there. We can say in potential, from the point, if we were to occupy this point in time, we could say we might say it's potentially there. Someday a thing is going to be able to think. But a thing thinking that knows it's thinking knows it had to be there. Do you understand that? So consciousness, if it's not there, cannot spontaneously create itself from what is not already. At this point, if we can go into it in time, in potential. Now that sounds like it's giving a little bit of room for consciousness could develop. But it's got to be there in form. You see, the matter that formed this cup into the cup shape, yeah, that was potential at that time. That could be formed. That could develop into that. But all that stuff, all that material, the clay, whatever, the silicone, whatever the ceramic constituents are, the atoms of this, were there. It's not new atoms. It's not different atoms. It's like looking at something, a silly example. I talked about the mountain with the locomotive in it, or the mountain, or the forest with the house in it. The guy looks at a forest and he sees his log cabin or his mansion or whatever. It's there. It's just got to be assembled, but the stuff is not. In his assembling, wood doesn't become not wood. It's still wood. It's just assembled a certain way. So consciousness, again, has to be resident. And if we say it's there at the beginning, then essentially we're saying the consciousness at the beginning is God. The consciousness at the beginning of creation. Now, the place we can go that others, really, it's off limits to them. Because we do have faith that things are real. We have been given faith that none of this is theoretical. Truth exists. This is not an abstraction. Now, we may experience things in some derivative form of truth through facts to bring us to truth, but we believe truth is. So we believe, even we can talk about, okay, then before the Big Bang, God is. The consciousness is. God is the knowing. God is the knower. Now, I don't mean to reduce in anyone's mind who God is, how God is, what God is, because I don't want that reduced in my mind. So if I'm putting that out there, I'm also inhibiting myself. So I'm very selfish in that sense. I very much appreciate the expansion, the increase of his government. I very much appreciate. And he knows it. It's not why I believe in him. He knows that too. But in that faith in him, there is a coming to understanding of the increase of his government. There is no end. There's no place where we tap our fingers, bored. What's next? Okay, so now I've seen it all. Now I know it all. So that expansion. That's interesting, right? The Big Bang is an expansion from whatever they talk about. Half a teaspoon of all matter, everything that ever was and would be in the universe. And ba-boom, the moon to write love songs about, all of that stuff. So I trust that in some way this has an appeal to your spiritual reasoning, because to see consciousness and the participation in it with God as a gift from God helps us understand God does not give us gifts as weapons in the sense of injuring one another, to the end of injuring one another. These weapons are to be used against what would use what God gives for injury. And there are thoughts, concepts, ideas that would seek to injure you in your faith in Jesus Christ. But you are not naive. You are not gullible. You are not foolish for believing the only one who has never lied to you. Now, on the same hand, I was going to say on the other hand, but it's really the same hand. We can't be proud about it. There's no pride in it. This is all a gift. Knowing God is a gift. But there's joy in it. And we're finding out just how deep, high, wide a thing is to be beyond our comprehension that we have been given as gift. So may the joy of the Lord be your strength, and may he find you holy, blameless, complete, because as he does, you will. Be well, brothers and sisters.